curious things about Star Wars is that 40 years later, and looking back, pretty much everyone knows the main villain of the trilogy is Darth Vader. I mean, I guess you could say the Emperor, because he's like, the guy in the chair. But Vader's got all the screen time, he looks cool, and especially in Empire, he's badass. In Star Wars, though, he's much more of a lackey of this guy. Doesn't even get colored on the poster. Grand Moff Tarkin. What the hell is a Moff? Yeah, I don't know. Well, why is one better than another? One is grand, one's vente. Either way, Grand Moff Tarkin has had his fair share of action figures over the days, but he never had one in the vintage era, which is, again, kind of odd because he really is the main villain of A New Hope. I mean, he's the guy who orders Alderaan blown up. Darth Vader just kind of stands around. So when we did get our very first action figure of Tarkin in Power of the Force, it was a time to celebrate. We didn't know that at that point we were going to get further versions of Tarkin down the line, especially when he showed up in Episode 3, and we got to get that figure repainted a few times. And of course the perfect version, quote-unquote, from the vintage collection, although I don't care for the soft goods skirt, and then a retro version released with the Hoth board game. So yeah, Tarkin gets a lot of spotlight, and this is because the Imperial officers are a huge part of Star Wars, and they are so underrated, especially in the 80s. We basically got a token Imperial officer, and that was it. And considering all of the different colors they come in, it was great that Power of the Force 2 got us jump-started with Pied and Mahdi, but man, fans wanted more. Hasbro was really reluctant at first, feeling like, well, they're all just guys in gray suits. But hey, some of them wear white, some of them wear black, some of them wear greenish. Either way, it didn't matter that they all basically looked the same. In the end, the fans won this battle, and Hasbro caved and finally started putting out lots of Imperials, especially when they realized, oh, this is a low tooling jackpot. Now, again, as I mentioned, the original line in the 80s, we only got the Imperial Commander figure, which is odd because it has a picture on it of this guy who's then the AT-AT commander. So in a way, you get two different action figures out of Walter Donovan, and you get no action figures of a generic officer. But because he was dressed in black, a lot of people saw him as a generic, or maybe as Piet. Some of my friends called him Piet. And there were actually two different versions, a skinny head and a fat head, which is going to come up in a moment. Let's put a pin in that one, because, well, pins are fun. Now, Power of the Jedi brought us our first black-garbed Imperial officer, which we meet them early on in A New Hope, and they carry through. This version needs a little help from ironing. I've never seen an Imperial suit look that wrinkled on screen, but hey, maybe because it was going to help kids hold on to the figure and not slip? I don't know, but yeah, really wrinkled. And much like the vintage figure, additional head sculpts were done, this time not by accident, but on purpose. 3 different complete portraits were offered over the course of the line. Granted, the other portraits didn't come out till much later during the Saga and the Saga Gold card. This is the blue card. But it was great that they could maximize this tool with new heads. Eventually, we did get a completely new body for a black Imperial officer, or a black garbed Imperial officer. He's white. He's a white guy wearing black. Anyway, that's an Ewok. So yes, we eventually got more Imperial officers in the black outfit, including the one who says, "You rebel scum." So yeah, it was cool. Now we didn't have to go find a toy iron from our Barbie line to try to fix that wrinkled costume. Still haven't gotten a vintage one, which is interesting because they have the tool and, they were big in the vintage line. All right, moving on from Imperial officers to Rebel fighters. We got this guy next up in Power of the Jedi, the Rebel Trooper, or as I like to say, the Alderaanian Trooper, because they're on an Alderaan ship. They're not part of the rebellion at that point. Well, I guess you're splitting hairs. We got a previous Rebel Fleet Trooper in Power of the Jedi, but since this was an early release for Power of the Jedi, it had that sort of super buff, I'm using the Solo Plex down in my basement, and that's because the line, like most toys, is aimed at kids, and back in the 90s, all action figures were all about being buff and super strong. It was kind of a, appendage of the 1980s. I mean, even Nedry was ready to take you out with one punch. So, yeah, that wasn't exactly Newman's body type. So with this trend going on in action figures, it's no wonder that we had so many buffed out figures, and because the Rebel Fleet Troopers in the movie aren't buffed out, well, it was great to finally get a movie-accurate version that was skinnier and could be posed in sort of the signature Rebel Fleet Trooper, Alderaan Trooper pose, which is on the ground on his knee, which was really cool because that's, how we're first introduced to them. It also should be noted that his pants being the correct blue, not the tan of the previous release, which is how they were dressed in the end scene for the Yavin 4 ceremony. So we actually finally had a Tantive 4 Rebel trooper, and much like the Imperial officer, they were released several times with different head sculpts, which, again, let us army build our Rebel troopers, even offering a 4-pack of just Rebel troopers because, again, hey, you want to get a lot of these. And a lot of these we got. Eventually, with the advent of the Vintage Collection and a brand new sculpt, an Army Builder set was released with all different portraits. The portrait we got in the Vintage Collection was meant to just be a generic Rebel Fleet Trooper, and that version got the Kodak Moment Photo Real treatment on a Rogue One card, and then all new heads were added for that 4-pack, which was especially cool because not only did we get Captain Antilles, he's the one in the tan, but one of the heads, the white guy, so we have an Asian and a black, but the white guy is this guy, who was the very first one we see, and the one that my friend Weird Evan from high school was convinced was going to be the star of the movie, and was shocked when he wasn't. He was expecting the movie to be about this guy. All right, moving on. The last figure in this wave is one of my favorite figures ever released, FX7. Oh, man, I wish I even just bought more of these. I think I have 3. Should have bought more. So if you don't know who I'm talking about, this is the droid that's part of the Hoth Echo Base medical wing, where, all the doctors hang out, like Dr. Ball and Dr. 21B, and he's kind of like a nurse, I guess, this droid. I don't know, but this droid has a very special place for me because as a child, this was one of the characters I had. I didn't have all of the 92 or 96. Probably only had like 30 when it came down to it. But boy, did I have FX7, and he was in all my adventures. And I used to use those arms as like laser guns, and the way his head popped up. I was kind of disappointed that the new one's head didn't pop up, even though it's not screen accurate. But man, this figure back in the day had so much play value. And obviously we're going for a much more authentic screen-accurate version now that it's in Power of the Jedi, and that's what we got. Although you will notice that in the screen, the robot is a little bit more bluish than he is kind of grayish. So the version released in Power of the Jedi did have a little bit more of a gray deco. You can even see it compared to the image on the card. Luckily, with a Hoth Rebels special action figure set available exclusively at Target, we eventually got a repaint of FX7 that hit a little bit of the darker blue. So this one is probably, rostified by 10%, if you will. It's that much better. But man, no figure in the entire line has much articulation as this guy. I mean, he's got over 30 points of articulation because each one of those arms has 2 articulation points. And for me, it was just bringing back all the wonderful memories of playing with this figure. There was nothing like it. There were no other toys like this figure. Being able to pull those arms in and out. It was just a lot of fun. And I love having this figure now. It'd be great to get a vintage figure release, but the tooling is probably long gone. But he deserves it. Make it again. Tool him all over again, Hasbro. Okay, probably not going to happen. The other really cool thing that needs to be mentioned about FX7 is that he came out right after the Luke Back-to-Tank Deluxe set, which we covered in the last episode, and there was a spot for him. So the Back-to-Tank set, I mean, obviously they knew this figure was coming. They were developed at the same time. But there's literally a spot on the Back-to-Tank, like a little empty circle there, that's perfect and meant for FX7. And I just love when they do these kind of things, because it just pays off for long-time buyers, long-time collectors, and getting to put all the medical droids around the Back-to-Tank make it really cool. And I love that FX7 is part of this set. He's meant to go, that's not just like a coincidence, if you will. And there's rarely anything like this in the entire line. It's one of the only cases, I think, of 2 different figures, maybe the Wampa and Hoth Luke that came out in the Saga collection. But other than that, there's not too many figures where they interact. Oh, I guess some of the deluxe figures with the light up did that. But, okay, not like this, not in a screen-accurate moment. All right, we're wishing for them in the vintage collection, but yeah, I wouldn't wish too hard on this one because it's a lot of tooling, and getting him or getting, Back-to-Tank Luke out there again on single cards, at least we got them in Power of the Jedi.